Hello and welcome to Computer Tech and More. Today I'm going to talk about performance of the Zephyrus G15 laptop in comparison to a desktop, both in terms of performance and like cost analysis in there. So right off the bat, the Zephyrus G15 that I have has a Ryzen 9 5800HS that under turbo mode can spike up to 65 watts, but when coupled together with the GPU load, its maximum is 45 watts. In performance mode, it's limited to 45 watts, and the GPU, I think, can still manage full power, and then silent, everything will run cooler. Sorry, I don't know the numbers offhand. And let's just jump right into the graphs that I have prepared. So first is 3D Mark 11. I know it's a little bit of an older benchmark, but I still like it because it allows me to validate against a bunch of older computers that I have. So right here at the top is the Zephyrus G15 laptop with the RTX 3070 mobile. And then right below it is my desktop with a desktop class RTX 3070. There's quite a big performance difference. And then my previous desktop, mainly the CPU is the difference. With an i7 6700K, you can see the performance difference there. And then versus a 1070. So there's actually quite a big jump in that mobile processor and a GPU versus the old 1070. And then some previous older generation graphics cards in there as well, down to a 1085 GTX. So that's a pretty old GPU. So kind of gives you an idea of how much more performance gaming laptop has now. And then the combined, I'll just hold that up for a second. You can see in the combined that the 6700K drops below the laptop, despite having a more powerful GPU. That's because of the CPU bottleneck. So next is Firestrike. And once again, we can see that the two desktops score quite a bit higher graphics than the Zephyrus G15. And then again, comparison to older hardware. The 1070 punches very similarly to the 3070 mobile, but it is quite a bit lower. And then next we'll look at the combined. In one of my previous videos, actually one of my first ones when I was new to this, I went over this, but here we'll talk about it again. So right here with the 6700K, it's lower than the Zephyrus G15, and that is because of the CPU bottleneck. The CPU just cannot keep up with the RTX 3070 at Firestrike's 1080p preset, basically. So notice I didn't get much performance gain versus a GTX 1070. And these two scores are also very similar. That leads me to believe that there is still some sort of CPU, GPU type bottleneck. No, CPU bottleneck, not GPU. Any graphs that do not have value on it, the graphics card I did not own at the time that I could test it, even though that there are computers out there that have that hardware, or the on 3D Mark's website. So next is Firestrike Extreme. You can see that the 6700K and 1011 700K have very similar scores at this point graphically. Oh, sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself again. And then here's the mobile. It's a bit less. Just leave it up there for a couple more seconds. Okay. And then next is the combined. So in the combined, there is still a little bit of a CPU bottleneck for the 6700K, but you can finally see that the desktop beats the laptop, unlike with just a basic Firestrike test. combined. So combined, I think, is the most realistic kind of test for CPU heavy games. But it starts to see the real performance, and then again the scaling for older hardware. And then next is Ultra. Here there's absolutely no CPU bottleneck, and the mobile is kind of left behind, but it still greatly outperforms a 1070. Again, that's graphics, and then the combined, which is what I consider the real testament to the performance. So right there, the 6700K and 11700K have near on identical performance. These are in frames per second. And there's the mobile. Okay, Time Spy. And I'll just leave them up there. So then Time Spy CPU test. You can see that the 6700K is just left in the dust behind this hardware. I do want to note that I was fairly surprised that how powerful mobile graphics cards just had become. I wasn't expecting it to just thoroughly trounce the GTX 1070 the way it did. But I did eventually get my hands on the desktop 3070, and I used this laptop for Plex server and media encoder, and kind of do everything, hook it up to my TV, play video games there, computer games there. And then the PCI Express test. This is also in 3D Mark. So this jump is jumping from PCI Express Gen 3 to Gen 4, 16x, both of these. And then this just shows how many lanes are dedicated in mobile. So it's kind of amazing how much performance you get out of the mobile 3070 compared to the desktop class, considering the PCI limitations. It just really shows that it really wasn't that much of a bottleneck. So this leads me to kind of one of my main talking points. Why go with a laptop over a desktop? First disclaimer, the first desktop I spec'd out is with similar components and not similar performance. So this one, sorry if that judders. This is the spec list. And this was based on what was available at the time of writing and producing the video, for a final price of $2,670. So I went with an 8-core to get it as close to an apples to apples comparison. It's got an Octo cooler. You could have gone with a cheaper one, but this was just for kind of a basic apples to apples. A motherboard could be done for a little bit less. I was just trying to get to the nearest equivalent. For similar gaming performance, you could have gone with a 5600 class Ryzen. But I was going for, again, 8-core to 8-core RTX 3070 to 3070. And I did purchase an aftermarket 2TB Cyberth Rocket for my Zephyrus G15. So again, this is just a basic spec out for it to be as similar as possible. Next, I made it as close in performance as possible. So again, I went with a 5800X. I left the cooler the same, motherboard the same, RAM all basically the same. And the only difference is the RTX 3060. Now, at the time that I was looking around, the RTX 3060 was only maybe $10 or $20 more than the RTX 3060, so TI versus non-TI. And the mobile RTX 3070 has about the same performance as a desktop RTX 3060, so this gets a little bit better performance. So this brings for a total price of $2,500. This is in stark contrast to the current pricing of the Zephyrus G15 gaming laptop, which retails regularly for $1,800 and is currently going for $1,550. So some caveats with my spec out system. I could have saved maybe $100, $150 on the motherboard, $60 on a cheaper case, $50, around $50 on a less expensive power supply. I wouldn't go below gold rated, and $20 to $30 on the cooler. I could have gone with a little bit lesser one that wouldn't allow for any overclocking. So this totals out to around $230 that I could have saved. So the price difference is still $800 for the nearest equivalent to this laptop. This goes against my past experience with gaming desktops versus laptops, where generally speaking, I've always thought desktops were just substantially less expensive than purchasing a gaming laptop. Jumping to performance class for the mobile GPU versus desktop class ones. This graph is from notebookgpucheck.com. I do not claim any credit in this graph. So I'm not telling you to go out and buy a gaming laptop instead of a gaming desktop. There are advantages to each, but if you're looking for the best bang for the buck, a gaming laptop might be it right now. There are disadvantages to going with a gaming laptop. First and foremost, gaming laptops. I'm gonna jump over there. Gaming laptops can be noisy. At full bore, to keep a gaming laptop cool, it will be noisier than a gaming desktop, at least a well-ventilated desktop. If you buy a case that's fully enclosed or anything like that, your performance will suffer. It will get hot and overheat. Next, overall performance. My example, a laptop has X amount of cooling capability because it has the combined heatsink and the two fans that operate together. If you're running a CPU-only workload, the GPU is not really producing any heat, so all the cooling power potential goes to the CPU. So a desktop and laptops CPUs can run at a similar performance level. Now, if you're gaming and the GPU and the game is GPU locked or limited, so the CPU is not really working all that hard, then most of the cooling is going to the GPU. Now let's say you want to run you're running a GPU-bound game and you want to run a CPU-intensive program in the background. On a desktop, this isn't a problem. Your CPU was not working all that hard to begin with, so adding the workload to it will not really affect your gaming performance. But on a laptop, it will. It just will. Now you're taking the cooling performance away from your GPU to allow the CPU to ramp up. The CPU will require more resources to run, more things, and it will produce more heat. There's a finite amount of cooling potential in a laptop, so it will take it away from the GPU. So if you plan on using your computer to multitask, you're better off going with a desktop than a laptop. And then the last, but certainly not least, is upgradability. In general, laptops are not as upgradable. Sure, you can add RAM on many of them, swap out an SSD, but if you want to upgrade your GPU or CPU, you basically have to buy a whole new machine. Why they're great. So portability. I physically can't take my desktop with me wherever I want to go very easily. A laptop, can fold it up, put it into a bag, and off I go. If I was in college right now, I honestly would recommend the G14. I feel that that's a better package than the G15. However, the G15 is still, I really wouldn't call that too heavy, but it's still a pretty good size. Next, energy efficiency. A laptop will just use less power overall than a desktop for similar performance at the wall. During gaming, I noticed that the G15 pulls about 130 watts, as opposed to my desktop, which easily pulls more than 250 watts, and that doesn't count the gaming monitor, which brings it up to over like 300, 350 watts. So there's that energy efficiency, sorry. Even more so, a laptop will use substantially less power when idling than a desktop. A desktop just has more inefficiencies when it's sitting around not really doing much. So that makes a laptop a great always-on machine. For example, this laptop pulls less than 30 watts when idling, when plugged into the wall. And the screen is on and doing whatever refresh rate it feels like doing. In conclusion, depending on what your case is, a gaming laptop could be the best pick for you. Personally, I use this laptop as a Plex media server and gaming on my old Full HD 1080p TV. But because of DLSS, this could be a real powerhouse at 4K. The only limiting factor for this particular model is that it does not have HDMI 2.1. I appreciate you all watching this video, talking about both this laptop and desktop comparison. Thank you very much and have a great day.